Welcome back to Cafe Stories, where every tale is a mystery waiting to unfold. A world of secrets, intrigue, and unforgettable adventures. Grab your coffee, stay curious, and lose yourself in the thrill of the unknown. Tonight, we begin Arsène Lupin and the Heist at Château Noir, Chapter 1. The Shadow's Arrival. A storm brews over the city, thunder rumbling like an ominous whisper. The Château Noir looms against the darkened sky, its towering spires casting long shadows over the cobblestone courtyard. Inside, a grand gala is in full swing, crystal chandeliers glow, champagne flows, and Parisian aristocrats laugh. But beneath the revelry, an unspoken tension lingers. Somewhere within these gilded halls, a priceless black diamond awaits, locked behind layers of impenetrable security. But Arsène Lupin is already inside. Dressed as a charming count, his sharp eyes scan the room, mind already 10 steps ahead. He's not just a thief, he's a master of the impossible, a gentleman who steals with flair and leaves no trace. But tonight, something feels different. A familiar presence brushes against him, a whisper in his ear. They know you're here, Lupin. The game has begun. The wind howled through the vast countryside of northern France, carrying with it the scent of an approaching storm. Towering above the misty hills stood Château Noir, a relic of nobility, power, and secrets buried beneath, centuries of whispered betrayals. It was an estate unlike any other, its darkened turrets reaching toward the heavens as if clawing at the sky for absolution. Beyond its fortified walls stretched an endless expanse of dense, towering forests, their skeletal branches swaying in the restless wind. The estate itself loomed atop a steep cliff, overseeing the dark waters of the river below, its reflection distorted in the churning current. To the uninformed, it was merely a lavish home of old money, an untouched fortress of aristocracy. But to those who truly understood its legacy, it was something else entirely. Inside the grand halls, luxury thrived. Marble columns, imported from Italy, framed the ballroom where golden chandeliers bathed the aristocracy in warm, flickering light. Velvet curtains, as dark as the night itself, concealed the towering windows, hiding those within from the vast expanse of the moonlit gardens. Crystal goblets clinked together in celebration, and murmured conversations danced through the air like invisible currents of intrigue. Perfumed air carried hints of aged wine, polished wood, and the faint scent of wax from the dozens of candles illuminating the chamber. Men dressed in tailored evening coats and silk cravats stood in tight clusters, their laughter deep and rehearsed, their eyes ever watchful. The women, adorned in shimmering gowns and draped in priceless jewels, spoke in hushed tones, their painted lips forming smiles that never quite reached their eyes. A string quartet played in the corner, their music weaving through the atmosphere, like an invisible thread holding the illusion of elegance together. Yet amidst the grandeur there was a lingering unease. Château Noir was no ordinary estate. It had witnessed centuries of power struggles, betrayals, and blood spilled for the sake of wealth. To those gathered within its walls tonight, it was merely the backdrop for yet another evening of opulence and deception. To others, it was something far more dangerous. And, somewhere in this labyrinth of excess and secrecy, Arsène Lupin had already made his entrance. Dressed in the finest tailored suit, he moved unseen, a shadow within a crowd that would never suspect his presence. He was not just a thief. He was an illusion, a ghost who passed through walls and walked among the elite without leaving a trace. The world knew his name, but they would never truly know him. Tonight, his target was the fabled black diamond, a gemstone of unfathomable worth, locked away in the chateau's most secure vault. But Lupin did not steal for wealth alone. The thrill of the game, the artistry of deception, these were the true rewards. Every heist was a challenge, a battle of wits against those who believed themselves untouchable, and Château Noir promised to be his greatest performance yet. However, this night was different. A presence lingered in the air, a force unseen but deeply felt. It was not the usual thrill of the chase, nor the familiar dance of predator and prey. It was something deeper, more personal, a whisper from the past, beckoning him toward a secret he had yet to uncover. Beneath the layers of aristocratic arrogance, whispered deals and veiled threats, something stirred, a silent war unfolding beyond the grasp of those who believed, themselves in control. There were too many eyes watching, too many hidden players moving their pieces across an invisible chessboard. And in that moment, Lupin knew. Tonight was not just a heist, it was a game of survival. Unbeknownst to him, forces far greater than greed or justice were already at play. The ancient clock in the grand hall struck midnight, its chime echoing through the corridors of Château Noir like a solemn whisper of fate. Outside, the storm had begun its slow advance, distant thunder rumbling across the sky as if warning those who dared weave their ambitions into the fabric of the night. Within the walls of the chateau, however, the storm of men's desires raged far more fiercely. Arsène Lupin navigated the ballroom effortlessly, his sharp eyes dissecting the room's every detail, a game of observation and misdirection that he had mastered long ago. The movements of the guests were predictable, their conversations rehearsed, their secrets veiled behind fragile facades of confidence. But Lupin? He was an enigma among them, a whisper of the unknown slipping through. Their midst, the Black Diamond was his ultimate goal, but tonight's game was far more intricate than a simple theft. The invitation to Château Noir had arrived in a peculiar fashion, an unsigned letter, inked in an unfamiliar hand, bearing only 6 cryptic words. You seek a jewel. I seek you. It was not a challenge, nor a warning. It was a lure. Lupin never ignored such invitations. He thrived on them. Who was playing this game with him? A rival? A hidden admirer? A threat? Every possibility excited him, but only one truth would reveal itself by the end of the night. As he continued his silent reconnaissance, a familiar face emerged from the crowd. Inspector Gaston Ganimard, the one man in France who had made it his life's mission to see Arsène Lupin behind bars. Dressed in the finest attire, Ganimard blended into the nobility with ease, but his posture was too rigid, his gaze too focused. He was not here for leisure. He was here for war. Lupin smirked, tilting his glass of wine to his lips, though he barely tasted the expensive vintage. If Ganimard was here, it meant the law was already one step behind. But the inspector wasn't the only figure of interest tonight. A woman stood near the grand staircase, watching everything with calculating eyes. The Countess de Rochefort, a woman of wealth, cunning, and a reputation draped in mystery. Rumors swirled about her connections to underground dealings, lost artifacts, and political secrets that could topple empires. Tonight, she was dressed in deep emerald silk, her gloved fingers lightly tracing the rim of her champagne glass as she surveyed the room. Was she the one who had sent the letter? Or was she another piece in this ever-growing puzzle? Lupin's instincts tingled, a sensation he had long learned to trust. Something unseen was stirring beneath the surface of this elaborate gathering. He knew how to read a room, and this one whispered of hidden schemes, unsaid truths, and a night that would not end in simplicity. Then it happened. A hush fell over the ballroom as the great doors swung open, revealing a towering man clad in black. His presence alone was enough to silence laughter, still conversations, and freeze even the most powerful men in place. His features were shrouded in the flickering candlelight, but his aura carried the weight of a man who did not make idle appearances. Countess de Rochefort's expression flickered, just for a second, but Lupin caught it. Fear, recognition, and something dangerously close to reverence. The man stepped forward, his voice smooth yet commanding. It seems we are all gathered here for more than just wine and pleasantries. Silence stretched as every guest turned to face him. Lupin did not yet know his name, but he knew one thing for certain. This was the real beginning of the night's deception. Chapter 2. Beneath the mask. The weight of silence pressed upon the ballroom like an unseen force. All eyes remained fixed on the imposing figure standing at the entrance, his presence radiating authority, though his identity remained veiled in mystery. Arsène Lupin, ever the connoisseur of human behavior, observed the subtle reactions rippling through the room. Some guests stiffened, others averted their gaze, and a select few exchanged wary glances. Every movement, Every twitch of a hand or flicker of an eye was a language only he could decipher. But it was the Countess de Rochefort's reaction that intrigued him most. For a woman known for her unshakable composure, the way her gloved fingers clenched her champagne glass, the way her throat tightened in a nearly imperceptible swallow, Lupin recognized these signs well. She was afraid. The man in black stepped forward, his voice carrying a distinct smoothness, edged with command, too. "Many games are being played tonight. Let us remove the masks, shall we?" He wasn't speaking of literal masks. No, this was a challenge, a warning, a move in a game far grander than anyone realized. A waiter, barely noticeable amidst the tension, weaved his way toward the center of the room, carrying a silver tray with a single envelope resting upon it. His posture was too rigid, his steps too rehearsed. A messenger, not a servant. With careful precision, he approached the Countess first, offering the envelope with a slight bow. She hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, but instead she simply took the letter. Then the waiter turned and walked straight to Lupin. A flicker of curiosity danced behind Lupin's eyes as he accepted the envelope. His fingertips brushed against the fine parchment, feeling the slightest indentation of an emblem pressed into the wax seal. The symbol of Château Noir. Intriguing. As he broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his sharp mind absorbed the words. Instantly. A single sentence, inked in precise, deliberate strokes. "The black diamond is not your only prize tonight." Lupin's smile was slow, deliberate. So, the game had truly begun. From the corner of his eye, he saw the Countess lower her own letter, her expression masked but her breathing just a fraction too controlled. She had received the same message. Whatever was unfolding tonight, they were now bound by the same riddle. The tension in the room was momentarily interrupted as the orchestra, unaware of the undercurrents of deception swirling through the air, resumed their melody. A waltz, slow and deliberate, much like the game Lupin now found himself entwined in. And then something unexpected happened. The Countess stepped forward, letter still in hand, and extended her arm toward Lupin. A silent invitation, a waltz, the most public yet most discreet method of conversation. Lupin hesitated for less than a breath before accepting, leading her onto the polished floor. As they moved, the crowd slowly resumed their own conversations, the tension melting into an illusion of normalcy, but the game was only just beginning. "It seems," the Countess murmured, "that we are both in the dark, Monsieur Lupin." "Darkness," Lupin mused, "is simply an invitation to sharpen one's vision." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. And yet even the keenest eyes can be deceived. A challenge, a warning, or a confession. As they danced, Lupin's mind raced. The black diamond was no longer the sole objective. Something bigger was at stake. But what? And who had orchestrated this web of intrigue? One thing was certain. By the end of the night, secrets would be exposed. And not all would survive them. The evening air grew colder as the grand clock in the hall chimed, its sound echoing through the vast space, an ominous reminder that time was running out. Arsène Lupin stood motionless, watching the dance floor. With keen eyes, the Countess had already disappeared into the shadows, and the room had shifted from its dazzling glamour to an almost predatory quiet. The game had evolved. Lupin's mind worked swiftly, sorting through the possibilities. The black diamond was no longer a mere treasure. It was now entangled in something far more dangerous. But what? As he moved toward the main hall, the elegant surroundings blurred, becoming mere backdrops for the rising tension. He could feel the weight of hidden eyes upon him. Somewhere in the crowd, someone was watching. He stopped at a grand mirror, adjusting his cufflinks as a distraction. His reflection stared back, an image of calm confidence, but beneath it, a storm was brewing. In the reflection, he saw a figure in the corner of the room, one who had been keeping to the edges, almost invisible. The Shadow, a name whispered in the underworld, a ghost who seemed to slip through every crack in the law. No one knew for certain who the Shadow was, but Lupin was certain of one thing. The Shadow was here. Lupin's lips twisted into a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. If the Shadow was watching, then the stakes had just been raised. But before he could make a move, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're playing a dangerous game, Lupin." Lupin turned to find Inspector Leclerc, a man with a reputation for being as relentless as he was blind to the nuances of the criminal world. His stance was rigid, eyes cold, a badge of authority gleaming under the chandeliers. "I could say the same about you, Inspector." Lupin's voice was calm, smooth, almost too smooth. The inspector's lips tightened. "The Countess is not your only problem tonight. If you're looking for the Black Diamond, you're going to have to get through me first." Lupin's heart beat once, slow and steady. So it was true. The law was already involved. A few months ago, Leclerc had been a mere obstacle, but now, in this setting, the inspector was a force to be reckoned with. Lupin had no intention of losing his edge, but he knew he'd have to tread carefully. "Then I suppose," Lupin said, his gaze drifting toward the nearest exit, "we'll just have to see who gets there first." With that, he turned and walked away, but the weight of Leclerc's gaze was heavy on his back. As Lupin moved deeper into the mansion, he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the only one hunting the Black Diamond, but the question was, who was leading the hunt? He reached a secluded hallway, the light dim and the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. A private room lay just ahead, its door slightly ajar. From within, a low murmur reached his ears. The conversation was too hushed to make out the words, but it was enough to stir a sense of unease within him. Lupin's instincts kicked in. The room was not empty. Carefully, he stepped closer, his presence nearly invisible as he crouched by the door. Inside, a familiar figure stood across from someone Lupin had never seen before, a man in a well-tailored suit, his face partially obscured by the shadows. The conversation was more than casual. It was an agreement, a transaction. He could feel it, the piece of the puzzle falling into place. The Black Diamond was just the beginning. There was something else at play, something that would soon unfold in a manner that none of them could have anticipated. Suddenly the mysterious man turned his head, his eyes locking on to Lupin's position, by the door. Caught. A smile spread across the stranger's lips. "I see we have an observer," he said, his voice like silk. Lupin didn't move. The game was on, and this was no longer a simple heist. This was a chess match, and in this game, everyone had a hidden agenda. Chapter 3. Tides of Deceit. The delicate balance between allies and enemies began to fray in the aftermath of the daring heist at Château Noir. What had started as a game of strategy and wit had quickly escalated into a dangerous conflict with too many players, each with their own agenda. Lupin stood on the edge of the shadows, watching the chaos unfold in front of him. Every action, every decision now carried weight. It was no longer just about securing the Black Diamond, it was about survival. His team was shaken. Sylvie, his tech expert, had been unusually quiet after the last mission. Her fingers fidgeted nervously with a lock-picking tool that had once been an extension of her hands. She had always been the steady one, but now doubt clouded her every move. A betrayal was in the air. Lupin had trusted Sylvie implicitly, but now there was something off. Her sudden evasions when questioned, her strained glances toward the others, and the way her movements had become more hesitant. Was she hiding something? Lupin's sharp gaze turned toward Vaughn, his former mentor turned ally. The seasoned thief had been a key part of Lupin's rise, but now even he seemed uneasy. Too uneasy. Leclerc, the lawman, had drawn his attention with cryptic words, yet the inspector's words seemed more like a trap than a warning. Was Vaughn truly on Lupin's side, or had he turned, like so many others in the past? The atmosphere was thick with distrust. The diamond, the key to everything, had disappeared into the wrong hands, and Lupin was no longer certain whether the mission would ever see a conclusion. But there was no time for doubt. The real enemy was closing in. The looming threat of the shadowy figure, a nemesis from Lupin's past, was creeping ever closer. Every step Lupin took felt like a calculated risk. Each of his decisions was a delicate balancing act. Any wrong move, and the entire plan could unravel. The pressure was building. Lupin needed answers. His mind raced, piecing together what little he knew. Who had stolen the black diamond? Why? Was the shadow involved? And most troubling of all, why did it feel like he was being played? The longer Lupin lingered in the shadows, the more it became clear. The enemy wasn't just outside. There were deeper layers to the puzzle, layers that Lupin had missed in the chaos. It wasn't just about retrieving the black diamond anymore, it was about unveiling the web of deception that surrounded it. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his most loyal allies. Everyone had secrets. The mysterious disappearance of a key ally had added more fuel to the fire. Jules, the street-smart informant Lupin had worked with on previous heists, had gone silent. His last message, a vague reference to the shadow, had sent Lupin into a tailspin. Jules was always at the center of the information network, always one step ahead of the law. But now, he was gone. Vanished. As Lupin pored over the few clues that remained, a disturbing realization began to set in. There was someone within his circle working against him. He couldn't pin down who it was, but the feeling was undeniable. The betrayal was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Lupin knew better than to ignore such instinct. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. The law was tightening its grip, with Leclerc growing increasingly more aggressive. Lupin had been a master of evading the authorities in the past, but the inspector was a new kind of adversary, driven, relentless, and more than capable of turning the tables. It was only a matter of time before Lupin would have to confront him directly. The complex relationships among his allies, the fractured trust between them, and the looming presence of the shadow forced Lupin to rethink everything. The hidden hands guiding the events were pulling the strings so deftly that Lupin was unsure if he had been playing his own game all along, or if he had been led to this point from the beginning. As the heat mounted, Lupin faced the ultimate test. Should he stay true to his moral code or betray everything to achieve his ultimate goal? As Lupin navigated through the intricate web of betrayals, something more sinister began to reveal itself. The stakes had escalated beyond what he had anticipated. The missing black diamond was just the tip of the iceberg. Every step Lupin took seemed to expose a deeper conspiracy, a much darker plan at play. The new clues were cryptic, hidden in plain sight. A forgotten ledger tucked away in a dusty corner of his safe house contained entries that made no immediate sense. But when Lupin traced the transactions back, his heart skipped a beat. The names listed in the ledger were not just criminals. They were politicians, members of high society, and even law enforcement officials. This was no ordinary heist. It was a carefully orchestrated scheme to control the city, maybe even the entire country. A betrayal was in the air. Lupin had trusted Sylvie implicitly, but now there was something off. Her sudden evasions when questioned, her strained glances toward the others, and the way her movements had become more hesitant. Was she hiding something? Lupin's sharp gaze turned toward Vaughn, his former mentor turned ally. The seasoned thief had been a key part of Lupin's rise, but now even he seemed uneasy. Too uneasy. Leclerc, the lawman, had drawn his attention with cryptic words, yet the inspector's words seemed more like a trap than a warning. Was Vaughn truly on Lupin's side, or had he turned, like so many others in the past? The atmosphere was thick with distrust. The diamond, the key to everything, had disappeared into the wrong hands, and Lupin was no longer certain whether the mission would ever see a conclusion. But there was no time for doubt. The real enemy was closing in. The looming threat of the shadowy figure, a nemesis from Lupin's past, was creeping ever closer. Every step Lupin took felt like a calculated risk. Each of his decisions was a delicate balancing act. Any wrong move, and the entire plan could unravel. The pressure was building. Lupin needed answers. His mind raced, piecing together what little he knew. Who had stolen the black diamond? Why was the shadow involved? And most troubling of all, why did it feel like he was being played? The longer Lupin lingered in the shadows, the more it became clear. The enemy wasn't just outside. There were deeper layers to the puzzle, layers that Lupin had missed in the chaos. It wasn't just about retrieving the black diamond anymore. It was about unveiling the web of deception that surrounded it. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his most loyal allies. Everyone had secrets. The mysterious disappearance of a key ally had added more fuel to the fire. Jules, the street-smart informant Lupin had worked with on previous heists, had gone silent. His last message, a vague reference to the shadow, had sent Lupin into a tailspin. Jules was always at the center of the information network, always one step ahead of the law. But now, he was gone, vanished. As Lupin pored over the few clues that remained, a disturbing realization began to set in. There was someone within his circle working against him. He couldn't pin down who it was, but the feeling was undeniable. The betrayal was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Lupin knew better than to ignore such instinct. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. The law was tightening its grip, with Leclerc growing increasingly more aggressive. Lupin had been a master of evading the authorities in the past, but the inspector was a new kind of adversary, driven, relentless, and more than capable of turning the tables. It was only a matter of time before Lupin would have to confront him directly. The complex relationships among his allies, the fractured trust between them, and the looming presence of the shadow forced Lupin to rethink everything. The hidden hands guiding the events were pulling the strings so deftly that Lupin was unsure if he had been playing his own game all along, or if he had been led to this point from the beginning. As the heat mounted, Lupin faced the ultimate test. Should he stay true to his moral code or betray everything to achieve his ultimate goal? As Lupin navigated through the intricate web of betrayals, something more sinister began to reveal itself. The stakes had escalated beyond what he had anticipated. The missing black diamond was just the tip of the iceberg. Every step Lupin took seemed to expose a deeper conspiracy, a much darker plan at play. The new clues were cryptic, hidden in plain sight. A forgotten ledger, tucked away in a dusty corner of his safe house, contained entries that made no immediate sense. But when Lupin traced the transactions back, his heart skipped a beat. The names listed in the ledger were not just criminals. They were politicians, members of high society, and even law enforcement officials. This was no ordinary heist. It was a carefully orchestrated scheme to control the city, maybe even the entire country. The realization hit hard. Lupin had unknowingly become a pawn in a far larger game. The stolen black diamond was only one piece of a much bigger puzzle, one that linked the most influential and dangerous figures in the world. A hidden message, found within the ledger's margins, only deepened the mystery. It was a warning. But from whom? Was it a message meant for Lupin, or was it placed there by someone with a more immediate interest in preventing Lupin from uncovering the truth? Lupin's mind raced as he traced the cryptic message back to its source. He couldn't afford to trust anyone right now, least of all his former mentor, Vaughn, who had been too conveniently absent during crucial moments. In the past, Vaughn had been a guiding figure, but Lupin could no longer ignore the possibility of betrayal. Had Vaughn been hiding something all along? Was he involved in the conspiracy? A sudden flash of doubt flickered within Lupin. The real enemy wasn't just the shadow, it was this network of powerful people, and they would stop at nothing to protect their interests. As Lupin processed the growing pile of revelations, it became painfully clear. He was playing a game he no longer fully understood, and the only way out was to keep moving forward, always one step ahead. But time was running out. The authorities were closing in, and the shadow's presence loomed larger with each passing day. Each of Lupin's decisions from this point forward would have consequences, not just for him, but for everyone involved. Lupin's mind raced as he pieced together the web of deception closing in around him. The closer he got to the truth, the more he realized how deep the betrayal ran, not just from the criminal world, but from those he once considered allies. The hidden ledger had led him to a breakthrough, a high-profile gala at the Château Noir, where the black diamond was to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. But this wasn't just an auction, it was a meeting of the most dangerous individuals in the world, each with a stake in the diamond's future. Lupin now understood that the diamond was only a symbol, a conduit for a much darker transaction. Despite his newfound knowledge, tensions between his team members began to rise. His trusted sidekick, the tech expert Claire, had been acting distant, her eyes darting with an unease Lupin couldn't ignore. The whispers from his past came back. Doubts about the people he trusted were becoming harder to silence. The tipping point came during a routine debrief. Claire revealed a shocking twist. She wasn't just helping Lupin, she was working for someone else. The betrayal was like a physical blow. The person who had been his confidant, someone he thought he could trust with his life, had been playing both sides all along. But there was no time to dwell on the personal sting. The stakes had risen beyond anything Lupin could have imagined. As Claire's revelations sank in, he understood that his position was compromised, and everyone around him had their own agenda. Even Vaughn, the mentor who had been eerily silent in the last few days, had a part to play in this ever-expanding conspiracy. The Shadow's influence was now undeniable. Vaughn was somehow connected to this mastermind, but in what capacity? Was he the mastermind pulling strings from the Shadows, or just another pawn in a larger game? Lupin couldn't trust his own instincts anymore. The lines between friend and foe had blurred to a point of no return. Desperation took hold. Lupin knew he had to act fast before the plan he had so carefully crafted for the heist was torn apart by this web of betrayal. He was running out of time, and with each passing moment the stakes grew higher. The auction at Château Noir was fast approaching, and Lupin had to decide, would he risk everything to expose the conspiracy, or would he play the game his own way, hoping to come out on top? But one thing was certain now. He couldn't trust anyone, not even his closest allies. Chapter 4. The cracks in the mirror Lupin stood in front of the mirrored walls of his temporary hideout, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The betrayal he had faced from Claire had shattered him, but he couldn't afford the luxury of dwelling on it. The heist at Château Noir was drawing closer, and his every move had to be calculated, deliberate, and ruthless. There was too much at stake now. As Lupin paced the room, his thoughts circled around one key element, the cryptic note Claire had handed him during their last meeting. She had insisted it contained vital information, but in his rush to process her betrayal, he had tossed it aside. Now, with the stakes growing exponentially, he couldn't ignore it any longer. He unfolded the note and began to read, eyes narrowing as the words slowly came into focus. The message was simple, but chilling. The Shadow will be waiting for you in the garden. Beware of the black roses. It wasn't much to go on, but it was enough to stir an unease deep within him. The garden at Château Noir was known for its labyrinthine paths, its intricate hedges and fountains. Yet the mention of black roses was something new, something Lupin hadn't expected. Lupin understood quickly that the note wasn't just a warning, it was a bait, carefully placed to lead him into a trap. The black roses, which had been a symbol used by a secret society within the criminal underworld, were infamous for marking the entrance to a hidden chamber beneath the estate. Only those with inside knowledge of the estate's labyrinth could find it, and that was exactly the kind of information Lupin needed if he was to make it through the heist. But who had planted this information, and why? Was Claire trying to help him, or was she pushing him deeper into the web of deception? Lupin's instinct told him it was the latter, that he had been played once again. But his mind wrestled with doubt. Claire had been a trusted ally for so long. What had changed? His mind raced with possibilities. If the Shadow was indeed waiting for him in the garden, there was a high chance that this was not just a simple heist. It was the beginning of something far darker, a plot he couldn't yet fully understand. Every step he took toward the garden would bring him closer to the heart of the conspiracy, and if he wasn't careful, he might be walking straight into his own undoing. But Lupin was no stranger to danger. He had made a career out of navigating the shadows, and he wasn't about to back down now. The game had changed, but Lupin was determined to outwit his enemies no matter the cost. Lupin carefully folded the note, his fingers brushing the edges, as if it were a fragile piece of evidence that held the key to a much larger puzzle. The threat was real, and with it, a sense of urgency rippled through him. He couldn't let his guard down. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. He made his way out of the hideout, his mind already strategizing his next move. The Shadow was a formidable opponent, one who had his own network of spies and informants. Lupin's instincts screamed that this wasn't just another heist. It was the opening move in a battle for dominance within the criminal underworld. The deeper he delved into Château Noir's mysteries, the clearer it became that he was not merely stealing treasures, he was uncovering secrets that many would kill to keep hidden. As Lupin approached the outskirts of the estate, he noticed a few subtle signs that things weren't quite right. The guards, usually an imposing presence, were more scattered than usual. Their movements felt deliberate, calculated, as though they were anticipating something. It was a subtle change, but Lupin had spent years perfecting his ability to read people's behavior, and something in their eyes told him that danger was closing in. He slipped into the shadows, merging with the darkened alleys of the estate's perimeter. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground, and for a moment Lupin felt the weight of the entire operation pressing on his shoulders. This was more than just another heist. It was a battle of wits, deception, and survival. And if he was going to outsmart the growing number of enemies around him, he needed to stay one step ahead. The garden loomed ahead, its high stone walls concealing the secrets it held within. Lupin's eyes scanned the area, looking for any indication that someone was waiting for him. He had no illusions about the danger that lay ahead. If the shadow was indeed there, it would be a face-to-face confrontation, and Lupin was prepared for whatever waited in the dark. He stepped forward, his footsteps barely making a sound on the cobblestones beneath him. As he crossed the threshold of the garden, he felt an almost palpable shift in the air, a strange heaviness like the world was holding its breath. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that immediately caught his attention. A single black rose, its petals dark against the pale moonlight, resting on the stone bench. The significance of the rose was clear. It was a warning. But what did it mean? Suddenly the sound of footsteps echoed through the garden. Someone was approaching. Lupin's heart raced as he quickly ducked behind a nearby hedge, his mind racing with the possibilities. Who had placed the rose? Was it the shadow, or was it something else entirely? He had no answers, but he did know one thing. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette, tall and composed, but with an unmistakable air of confidence. Lupin's pulse quickened, yet he remained still, blending into the darkness. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to act, but he held back, watching carefully as the stranger approached. The shadow. Lupin had suspected it for a while, but seeing him in person brought a new level of gravity to the situation. The man exuded a chilling aura, his movements slow, deliberate, and sharp with purpose. He stepped closer to the bench where the black rose lay, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if waiting for something or someone. For a long moment, the world seemed to stand still. The rustling of leaves, the distant hum of the city beyond the estate. It all became a background noise, muted under the heavy tension in the air. Lupin's mind raced, assessing every possible move. He could attack now, perhaps subdue the shadow, before things escalated further, but he knew it would never be that simple. The shadow had been one step ahead of him every turn. This encounter would likely play into a larger scheme, one that Lupin had yet to fully uncover. A sudden rustling in the trees behind them broke the silence, and the shadow's eyes snapped to the sound. Lupin's body tensed, every muscle ready to spring into action, but before he could make a move, the figure raised a hand, signaling him to stay hidden, a quiet command. Seconds passed, then a group of men appeared, silent and purposeful, like shadows moving as one. They approached, surrounding the shadow, all eyes sharp and alert. Lupin's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a trap, one that had been carefully laid for him. Lupin could feel his options narrowing. Escape was still possible, but it would require precision. The stakes had risen. The shadow wasn't here to negotiate. This was a battle for control, and Lupin was clearly outnumbered. Then in a split-second decision, Lupin made his move. He wasn't ready for an all-out confrontation, but he knew he could create a diversion, something that would throw them off, and give him the edge he needed. With fluid precision, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, something he'd perfected during his years of evading law enforcement.
A smoke grenade. He tossed it to the ground, and a thick cloud of white smoke billowed into the air, cutting off vision and creating chaos. Lupin moved with a purpose, darting through the smoke, his movements swift and calculated. But as he did,
the Shadow's voice cut through the fog, smooth and cold as ice. "You think this will save you, Lupin? The game is already over." For a moment, Lupin hesitated, caught between the urge to respond and the need to keep moving. He couldn't afford to give the Shadow the satisfaction of a reaction. He had to stay focused. The smoke began to thin, leaving a thick haze that obscured Lupin's vision. Adrenaline surged through his veins, but every step was calculated. He couldn't waste time. Every second spent in the fog brought him closer to being cornered. The movement around him was growing more frantic. His opponents were trying to regroup, but he was already one step ahead. Lupin pushed through the haze, moving with precision. His trained ears caught the distant sounds of footsteps, 4 or 5 men closing in. He moved to the side, pressing himself against the stone wall of the nearby mansion, his heart hammering in his chest. Then it happened. He heard the unmistakable click of a gun, the sound reverberating through the air like a death sentence. Hand shot out of the smoke, grabbing Lupin by the arm, pulling him sharply into a hold. The gun was pressed to his temple, cold and unforgiving. "Not so fast, Lupin," the voice growled. For a moment, everything slowed, the weight of the situation settling around him like a blanket. Lupin could feel his mind working, shifting gears. He had to keep calm, no matter the pressure, no matter the stakes. But as his eyes flicked to the figure holding him, the true betrayal sank in. Standing behind him with a look of icy betrayal on his face was Julian, his closest ally, his friend, the man he trusted with his life. Julian's grip tightened. "I didn't want it to be this way, but you left me no choice." Lupin's eyes widened in disbelief. He had always considered Julian one of his own, an integral part of the team. They had pulled off countless heists together. But now, standing
in front of him was a stranger, someone willing to turn his back on everything they had built. "I don't believe this,"
Lupin muttered, his voice a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Believe it," Julian responded coldly. "I've been working for the Shadow this whole time. You were never supposed to succeed, Lupin." The words hit Lupin like a physical blow. Betrayal was something he had always expected from his enemies, but not from his friends, not from Julian. The past few months, the mission they had embarked on, it had all been a setup. Lupin's mind reeled, trying to piece together the fragments
of the truth.
The cryptic messages, the wrong turns, the careful planting of misinformation. It had all been leading up to this moment. "You knew about the heist at Château Noir?" Lupin's voice was low, his eyes narrowing as he stared at Julia, the cold steel of the gun still pressed to his skin. Julian didn't flinch.
"Every step of the way, but you're too arrogant to see it. Now you'll pay the price for your blind ambition." The words stung, but Lupin's resolve began to harden. If there was one thing he had learned over the years, it was that no
matter how deep the betrayal, he always had a choice. He was running out of time. The men around them were closing in, but Lupin knew one thing. This wasn't over yet. He would find a way to turn the tables, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Lupin's thoughts raced as the cold barrel of the gun pressed harder against his temple. Every muscle in his body was taut, every nerve screaming at him to act, but he couldn't afford a mistake. Not now, not with everything at stake. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, as if trying to block out the pain of betrayal. Julian's words echoed in his mind. "You're too arrogant." A quiet laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep within him, a laugh born from frustration and a hint of admiration. Julian was good. He had almost fooled him. Almost. A small shift
in weight, the slightest crackling sound from the ground beneath his feet. It was enough. With a sudden movement, Lupin threw his body to the side, ducking under Julian's arm.
The gunshot rang out, echoing through the empty courtyard, but Lupin was already gone, slipping out of his hold with the precision of a master escape artist. Julian cursed, stumbling forward as Lupin rolled away, coming to a crouch just a few feet away. The men that had been closing in on him were now momentarily distracted by the chaos. Lupin didn't hesitate. He leapt to his feet and darted forward, weaving through the smoke. Adrenaline fueled his every move, every turn, every step. He could feel the tension building, the relentless pursuit on his tail. Julian was faster than he'd anticipated. The man recovered quickly, but Lupin had already calculated his next move. A twist of his wrist, a flick of his hand, and the smoke bomb exploded, filling the air with a thick fog. It was a perfect cover. For a moment, there was nothing but chaos. Lupin's eyes flicked across the courtyard as he pulled an old trick from his arsenal, the false trail. He dashed to the left, throwing a few objects along the way to create confusion. For a few seconds, Julian would be lost. Lupin's mind worked quickly, and he started making his way toward the exit of the courtyard, where a hidden vehicle awaited. He had anticipated this moment for weeks. If everything went according to plan, he would be long gone by the time Julian realized he'd been outwitted. But as he neared the exit, a chilling sound froze him in place. Footsteps. Too close. Lupin turned, just in time to see Julian coming from the shadows, a cruel smile on his face. He had circled around, knowing exactly where Lupin would try to escape. The betrayal had cut deeper than Lupin had thought, but now it was clear. Julian was ready to finish what he had started. "No more tricks, Lupin," Julian said coldly, raising his gun once more. Lupin's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was already working. He couldn't run, not with Julian blocking his path. He would have to outsmart him one last time. In a final moment of clarity, Lupin's hand slid into his coat pocket. The small device was there, just as he had planned. With a swift motion, he activated it. The smoke screen expanded once more, and in the chaos that followed, Lupin vanished into the night, leaving Julian standing alone. Chapter 5. The final gamble. The storm raged outside, the violent winds howling like a chorus of fury. Inside the abandoned mansion, the air felt thick with tension, the walls closing in on Lupin as he stepped carefully through the dimly lit hallway. This place, Château Noir, held deep significance for both him and his adversary. It was here that their paths had first crossed, and it was here that their final confrontation would take place. For Lupin, the mansion represented everything he had lost: trust, loyalty, and the bond he once shared with Julian. It had been years since they'd worked together, but the betrayal still cut deep. The familiar creak of the floorboards beneath his feet echoed in the otherwise silent space, his every step purposeful. He had come here to put an end to it, but the shadows of the past loomed large. The building itself, once magnificent, now felt like a tomb, a fitting setting for the final battle. The heart of the mystery lay here, in the depths of the mansion's forgotten rooms. Lupin had pieced together the final clues, each one a fragment of a larger puzzle. He knew now that the heist at Château Noir had never been about the treasure, the artifact, or even revenge. It had always been about something bigger, and Julian, with his carefully cultivated facade, had been the perfect pawn. But Lupin had learned the truth too late. Lupin's hand hovered near the hidden compartment in his coat, where the precious document, the key to everything, was tucked away. His mind raced, but his focus remained sharp. Every decision had led to this moment. His adversary, Julian, had set the stage perfectly, a battle of wits, a psychological war that would test everything Lupin had learned over the years. But Lupin was not the same man he had been when they first met. He had changed, hardened by the betrayals, the losses, the endless games of cat and mouse. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now, not with everything on the line. The floorboards groaned, and Lupin instinctively dropped to a crouch, eyes scanning the room. The storm outside intensified, rattling the windows. Every sound, every movement felt amplified, as if the universe itself was holding its breath in anticipation. He had been expecting this. Julian was here. He had to be. The plan had always been to get to the heart of the mansion, where the ancient vault awaited, its contents shrouded in secrecy. But that vault was no longer just a treasure trove. It was the key to a much darker plot. Lupin had learned of the secret society operating from the shadows, manipulating events for years, And Julian, for all his skill and charm, had been their puppet, the unwitting villain in a larger game. As Lupin approached the main chamber, a door creaked open, and he froze. The shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. Julian. His face was hard, his eyes colder than Lupin had ever seen them. "You shouldn't have come, Lupin," Julian said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty room. There was no warmth in his tone, only the chilling finality of a man who knew the battle was over. Lupin didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. He was waiting for the right moment, the moment when everything would fall into place. The storm outside raged on, thunder cracking like a gunshot, but within the mansion there was only silence, a silence that threatened to consume them both. The tension in the room was palpable, the air so thick it seemed to crackle with the unsaid. Julian's gaze never left Lupin as he stepped forward, his footsteps slow, deliberate. Each movement seemed calculated, as if he were savoring the moment, relishing in the idea that Lupin had walked right into his trap. Lupin stood his ground, his face a mask of calm resolve. His hand remained near the compartment in his coat, but he made no move. Every sense was alert, every muscle ready to spring into action. He knew that the slightest misstep could tip the balance in this game of cat and mouse. You still don't understand, do you? Julian's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of manipulation. This was never about you, Lupin. It was always about power. The kind of power that comes from control, from knowing who moves. The pieces. Lupin's jaw tightened. He had known for some time that Julian's ambitions had stretched beyond personal revenge. He had been blinded by his own anger, by the betrayal he had felt. But now, with everything at stake, he could see the bigger picture. Julian was not just after money, not just after the treasure hidden within the vault. It was something far darker, something that could reshape the entire balance of power in the criminal world. "I came here to stop you, Julian," Lupin finally said, his voice cold and steady. "But it seems you've already won." A twisted smile tugged at the corners of Julian's lips. "You really think it's that simple?" he asked, shaking his head. "You've
underestimated me, Lupin. I've been 10 steps ahead of you from the beginning. The treasure, the heist, the betrayal, all of it was a distraction, a game." Lupin's heart skipped a beat.
A sense of dread settled in the pit of his stomach. It was never about the treasure. It had all been a carefully orchestrated move, a distraction to keep him focused on the wrong target. Lupin's mind raced, searching for any misstep in Julian's plan, but there was none. Julian had thought of everything. "You've lost, Lupin," Julian continued, his eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. "You just don't know it yet." Lupin's mind flashed back to the early days of their partnership, to the way they had worked together, trusting one another with their lives. How had it all come to this? His emotions wavered between disbelief and anger, but there was no room for weakness now. He had come too far to back down. The sound of the storm outside intensified, the rain slamming against the windows as the wind howled like a beast. Inside, the air felt stagnant, heavy with the weight of the inevitable. "I didn't come here to win, Julian," Lupin said, his voice hard. "I came here to end this." Without warning, Lupin moved, a blur of motion. His hand shot out to the compartment in his coat, retrieving the small, delicate document, the key to everything. With a swift motion, he tossed it to the floor between them. Julian's eyes flickered briefly to the document, but it was enough. The distraction worked. In the instant Julian's focus shifted, Lupin's body reacted. He surged forward, tackling Julian with all his strength, sending both of them crashing to the ground. The room erupted into chaos, a struggle for control, a desperate battle to survive. Lupin's mind raced as he grappled with Julian, each of them fighting for the upper hand.
Every move was calculated, every strike a testament to years of training and experience.
But Julian was no novice. He fought back with equal fervor, a twisted smile still playing at his lips. "You think you've won?" Julian sneered, struggling beneath Lupin's grip. "This is only the beginning." For a split second, Lupin hesitated, a fleeting moment where doubt threatened to creep in. Was this truly the end? Was there still hope for redemption? Then, without warning, Lupin's mind cleared. There was no time for second-guessing. He had to act, and he had to act now. With a final, decisive move, Lupin subdued Julian, his heart pounding in his chest as he took control. But the victory felt hollow. The storm outside still raged, and the darkness that had hung over them from the start was far from over. The struggle ended as quickly as it began, the sounds of a violent clash giving way to an eerie silence. Julian lay still, his breathing shallow, his eyes glazed over with the unmistakable look of defeat. Lupin's hands were trembling, but he didn't let go of the moment. The power had shifted, but the cost was far from clear. Lupin stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow as he took in the sight of his former ally, now defeated. The weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. There was no victory, dance, no celebration, just a deep, gnawing sense of uncertainty. He crouched beside Julian, looking into the man's eyes. Julian's smile, that twisted grin, had faded entirely, replaced by something far less certain. Regret. "Why, Julian?" Lupin whispered, almost to himself. "Why did you have to go this far?" Julian's lips parted, barely able to form the
words. "You never understood," he croaked, his voice weak, but filled with venom. "This world doesn't work the way you think it does, Lupin. Power isn't given, it's taken." Lupin's mind was racing. The true nature of this fight was more complex than he had ever realized. Julian wasn't just after wealth or personal gain. He was driven by something much darker, a need for control over every aspect of their lives, a desire to shape the world according to his twisted vision. As Lupin stood, the room seemed to grow colder.
The storm outside had reached its crescendo, the lightning flashing violently, illuminating the dark corners of the room. But it wasn't the storm that chilled him now. It was the growing realization that the truth, no matter how hard he tried to avoid it, had finally come crashing down. Julian's words rang in his ears. Power wasn't given, it was taken. How many times had Lupin heard similar sentiments throughout his life, from adversaries, from those who had sought to manipulate him? He had always resisted, but now, in this moment, with Julian at his feet and the fate of the entire operation hanging by a thread, Lupin had to ask himself, had he become part of the same world he had once tried to outrun? The choices in front of him were monumental. The document, the key to everything, lay on the ground, still glowing with significance. It was the culmination of months of planning, the endgame for both Lupin and Julian. But now it held far more weight than Lupin had ever anticipated. Julian had tried to manipulate him, and yet Lupin had the power to change the course of events entirely. His fingers brushed over the document, hesitating for a moment. This was the choice. To take control, to continue the game, to follow through with what had been set in motion, or to walk away, to let go of the treasure, the legacy, and the power. As Lupin reached down to retrieve the document, a soft voice broke through the storm's howling fury. Elodie. She stepped into the room, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. She had always been there for him, and now her presence felt like a lifeline. "Lupin," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of its own. "What will you do?" Lupin turned to face her, the silence of the room thick between them. The finality of the question hung in the air. She didn't know it, but she was offering him an escape. A way out, a way to step back from this madness before it consumed him completely. He could feel the pull of his choices, the conflicting forces inside him, the allure of revenge and the drive to fix the past, to outwit Julian and claim victory. But there was something in Elodie's eyes that made him pause. She was more than just an ally. She was the tether that kept him grounded, the person who had seen him at his best and worst, the one who still believed in the possibility of redemption. His grip on the document tightened, then loosened. He couldn't do it, not in this way, not at the cost of everything he had fought to protect. The decision was clear now. The power he had sought was a dangerous illusion. He dropped the document onto the floor with a decisive movement, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. He had chosen the right path. "I'm done with this," Lupin said, his voice resolute. It's over. Elodie's expression softened, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. She walked toward him, her hand reaching out. Together they turned their backs on the chaos that had unfolded, leaving behind a trail of destruction. But the storm was far from over. The final moments of the night were filled with an unsettling stillness. Lupin and Elodie stood side by side, their eyes locked on the scene before them. The crumpled form of Julian, the destruction, and the shattered remnants of everything they had once fought for. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small, cold room, there was an uncomfortable peace. Lupin couldn't shake the feeling that the finality of this moment was somehow an illusion. He had made his choice. He had walked away from the power, from the deceit, from the hunger for control, but the weight of what had transpired still pressed down on him. He had defeated Julian, but had he truly won? Elodie placed a gentle hand on his arm, breaking his reverie.
"You did the right thing," she said softly, her voice a comforting reminder of the bond they had shared through all the trials and betrayals. "I hope so," Lupin replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I don't know anymore. I can't."
Shake the feeling that I've missed something important, that there's more to this than we know. Elodie nodded. She, too, understood the weight of the decisions that had been made. The world they had been immersed in was never simple, and the consequences of their actions would ripple out far beyond what they could anticipate. But before either of them could say another word, the door to the room swung open, and in walked an unexpected figure, Inspector Dupin. His expression was unreadable, his eyes scanning the room with a keen, almost predatory gaze. For a moment, Lupin felt his heart race. This was the man who had been chasing him, the law enforcement officer, who had always been one step behind. Dupin had been part of the game, but which side was he on now? "You're a hard man to catch, Lupin," Dupin said, his voice cool and professional, yet laced with something more, something far darker. He wasn't here to arrest Lupin, that much was clear. But what was his true purpose? Lupin studied the man carefully, sensing the shift in the air. He had never fully trusted Dupin, but he had always respected his cunning. There was more to this encounter than met the eye. "I was beginning to think you were working with Julian," Lupin replied, his voice steady but laced with tension. "What do you want, Dupin?" The inspector's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Lupin, and you're not the only one with secrets. There are things you still don't understand." Lupin narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Before Dupin could respond, Elodie stepped forward, her eyes hard with resolve. "Enough with the games, Inspector. What's your real agenda? We've been through enough." Dupont's gaze shifted to her, and for a fleeting moment there was something almost apologetic in his expression. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "The world you've both been playing in is much larger than either of you can fathom. This isn't the end, it's only just beginning." Lupin took a step closer, his instincts on high alert. Was Dupont threatening them, or was he offering a warning? "You've made your decision," Dupont continued, his voice tinged with finality. "But the forces at play here are not going to let you go so easily." As the words hung in the air, Elodie's hand tightened on Lupin's arm. The realization began to dawn on him, slowly but surely. This wasn't the conclusion he had hoped for. The story was far from over. Dupont turned to leave, his footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. But before he exited, he left them with one final remark. "Don't think you've won. This game isn't finished." And with that, the door slammed shut, leaving Lupin and Elodie standing in the quiet aftermath, alone but not free. Lupin's mind raced, 1,000 possibilities running through his head. Had Dupont been part of the conspiracy all along? Had he been manipulating them? Or was there something more, something bigger, lurking just beyond their grasp? "Looks like we're not out of the woods yet," Lupin murmured, his voice filled with a quiet determination. Elodie looked up at him, her expression resolute. "We never were," she replied. As they walked out of the room together, the storm outside seemed to settle, but the uncertainty that lay ahead felt heavier than ever. The game, it seemed, was far from over. Thank you for tuning in to Cafe Stories. If you enjoyed the intrigue and suspense, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more captivating adventures. Your support keeps the stories coming and the mysteries alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and keep the mystery alive.